Hello. Road to GH will reveal interesting facts for the week of March 24th to 28th, 2025. First, Elizabeth spent an entire afternoon lost in thought, trying to make sense of the emotions she had suppressed for so long. Her heart ached for Lucky, but the scars of the past were not easily forgotten. If they were to move forward, they couldn't rush into anything. They needed to be sure. Time had changed them both in ways they couldn't fully understand, and she was determined not to make the same mistakes again. She wanted more than just fleeting passion. She needed something real, something lasting. Lucky wrestled with his own feelings, still haunted by the moment they had nearly given into their desires. The attraction between them was undeniable, but was love enough to mend all that had been broken? He knew that Elizabeth had doubts, and truthfully, so did he. The pain they had endured could not simply be erased, yet his love for her had never faded. He needed to know if she truly wanted this, if they were ready to face everything that had once torn them apart. That evening, when they finally came face to face, the air between them was thick with unspoken emotions. But this time, instead of avoiding the difficult conversation or letting passion take over, they sat down and allowed themselves to be vulnerable. They reminisced about the beautiful memories they had shared, yet neither of them ignored the heartache that had driven them apart. Elizabeth cautiously voiced her concerns, and Lucky, in turn, assured her that his feelings had never wavered. He had loved her then, he loved her now, and he was willing to fight for them. There were no grand promises, no declarations of forever, only an understanding that in this moment, they still belonged to each other. Elizabeth felt the hesitation inside her begin to fade as she looked into Lucky's eyes and saw the depth of his sincerity. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to lean into the warmth of his touch, surrendering to the love that had never truly left them. As the evening unfolded, they embraced the possibility of a new beginning. It wasn't about recreating the past or ignoring the pain they had endured. It was about learning to love each other in the present. And for the first time in a long while, Elizabeth felt hope. Maybe this was their chance to start over, not as the people they once were, but as the people they had become. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Second, Nina found herself overwhelmed with anxiety as she struggled to maintain control over a situation that seemed to be slipping further from her grasp. Her concerns revolved around Drew, a man who had become an unexpected obstacle in her fragile relationship with Willow. The mere thought of Willow choosing to live with Drew unsettled her, stirring up fears that she would lose whatever progress she had made in reconnecting with her daughter. Nina knew she had to act quickly, but every move she made felt like it could backfire. Determined to drive a wedge between Willow and Drew, Nina devised a plan that she hoped would shift things in her favor. She was willing to manipulate circumstances, subtly plant doubts, and use whatever influence she had to ensure that Willow wouldn't grow too close to Drew. However, as she pushed forward with her efforts, she couldn't ignore the nagging fear that her desperation might cost her more than she was prepared to lose. If Willow sensed Nina's interference, it could shatter the fragile truce between them and undo all the work she had put into earning back her daughter's trust. To make matters worse, Drew wasn't oblivious to Nina's schemes. He had his own reasons to be wary of her and, if pressed, he wouldn't hesitate to expose their past connection. The thought of Drew revealing their previous relationship to Willow was enough to send a chill down Nina's spine. If he decided to take her down with him, she could end up in a far worse position than she had anticipated. The balance of power was delicate, and Drew had the ability to tip the scales in a direction that could leave Nina isolated and vulnerable. As she weighed her options, Nina couldn't shake the sense that she was on the verge of losing control. Every decision carried risks, and the more she tried to manipulate the situation, the more it seemed to slip through her fingers. She had spent so much time trying to reclaim her place in Willow's life, but if she wasn't careful, she could push her daughter even further away. The prospect of Drew gaining more influence over Willow only heightened her anxiety, making her question whether she had already lost the battle before it truly began. No matter how she looked at it, Nina was running out of time. She could continue playing her games, hoping to shift things in her favor, or she could take a step back before she made an irreversible mistake. But the hardest part was accepting that, in her desperate attempts to control the narrative, she might be the one who ultimately destroyed the very relationship she was trying to protect. Third, Drew meticulously prepared for his upcoming press conference, fully aware that the event had the potential to reshape public perception, either in his favor or against him. He had strategized his talking points, anticipating questions that might arise, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that things might not go as smoothly as planned. Given the unpredictable nature of public scrutiny and the lingering controversy surrounding him, the press conference could quickly spiral into disaster, depending on how the media and his rivals responded. If any unexpected allegations surfaced, his already fragile reputation could take an even harder hit. Despite his efforts to control the narrative, Drew understood that he couldn't face this storm alone. As the pressure mounted, he realized he needed someone in his corner, a strong ally who could help him navigate the potential fallout. With Martin now facing legal troubles of his own and being extradited to California, Drew knew he had lost his most reliable legal counsel at a time when he might need one the most. The absence of a trusted attorney left him vulnerable, forcing him to consider alternative options before his situation worsened. Fortunately, Drew didn't have to search for long before a possible solution presented itself. Marco, an experienced lawyer who had already begun making waves in legal circles, emerged as a promising candidate. Though their interactions had been limited, Drew saw potential in Marco's sharp instincts and ability to maneuver complex legal battles. If Marco agreed to represent him, it could turn the tides in Drew's favor, especially if he needed to mount a counteroffensive against those working to undermine him. With mounting speculation surrounding his name and the press eager for any misstep, Drew knew that securing competent legal representation wasn't just a precaution, it was a necessity. Marco could be the key to helping him maintain control over his narrative and protect himself from any further damage. If the press conference ended up being a disaster, Drew would need someone to handle the inevitable legal fallout and ensure that he had a solid defense ready. As the pieces fell into place, Drew remained cautious but determined. He had been through enough to know that in the world of power and influence, nothing was ever certain. But with Marco potentially stepping in as his new legal ally, he felt a renewed sense of confidence. Whether the press conference marked a turning point for the better or another major setback, one thing was clear: Drew was preparing for whatever battle lay ahead. Fourth, Marco's arrival in Port Charles was something that Lucas had been eagerly anticipating, though he had no idea just how much intrigue and deception were wrapped up in his old friend's return. For Lucas, the news of Marco coming to town felt like a fresh start, an opportunity to reconnect with someone he had a history with and possibly build something meaningful. But what Lucas didn't know was that Marco wasn't coming to Port Charles simply to see him. He was arriving with a secret agenda, and if Lucas wasn't careful, he could find himself caught up in something far more dangerous than he ever expected. Unbeknownst to Lucas, Marco had been keeping a significant secret, one that could change the way everyone viewed him. Rumors had already started to swirl, with signs pointing to the possibility that Marco was actually the son of the powerful and enigmatic Sidwell and Natalia Ramirez. If true, this revelation could explain why Marco had suddenly become a key player in the latest undercurrents of Port Charles. His ties to Sidwell suggested that his return wasn't just a social visit, it was part of something much bigger. Sidwell had long been known as a man who operated from the shadows, manipulating situations to serve his own interests, and if Marco was working under his influence, then his presence in Port Charles had a much more sinister purpose. Adding to the mystery, Marco's first stop in town wasn't just to see Lucas, it was Windmere, a place that had long been associated with secrecy, power, and deception. His decision to visit the Erie Cassadine estate suggested that he had a plan to discuss with Sidwell, possibly one that had been in motion long before he even set foot in Port Charles. Whatever conversation took place there was bound to have serious consequences, not just for Marco and Sidwell, but for those unknowingly caught in their web. It was becoming increasingly clear that Marco's return wasn't random. He had a mission, and if Lucas wasn't careful, he could become collateral damage. Another strange clue that hinted at Marco's deeper involvement in Sidwell's schemes was the seemingly insignificant event of his credit card being dropped in Miami. At first glance, it might have looked like a simple accident, an everyday mistake anyone could make. But those who paid attention to Sidwell's methods knew better. There were no coincidences when it came to Sidwell's plans. If Marco had truly dropped his card by mistake, then why had it become such an important detail? What if Sidwell had orchestrated the entire thing as part of a calculated move? The idea that Sidwell had intentionally planted Marco in Lucas's life under false pretenses was chilling. If Lucas was nothing more than a pawn in Sidwell's grand design, then Marco might have been sent to get close to him for a specific reason, one that Lucas would never see coming. With so many moving pieces in play, it was clear that Sidwell had a long-term vision that was finally coming to fruition. He wasn't the kind of man who made reckless moves. Every decision he made was carefully crafted to benefit his position and expand his influence. If Marco was working directly under his father's command, then his arrival in Port Charles was the start of something much bigger than anyone realized. And while Lucas remained blissfully unaware, excited to welcome Marco into his life, the reality was that he was standing on the edge of a dangerous game, one that he hadn't even realized he was playing. As Marco settled into town, the facade he presented to Lucas and others would soon be tested. Would he continue to follow Sidwell's orders, manipulating Lucas for his own gain, or would he break away and forge his own path? The stakes were high, and if the truth about Marco's identity and motives were to come out, the fallout would be explosive. Lucas, unaware of the danger lurking beneath the surface, was at risk of being pulled into a world of power plays, deception, and betrayal. If Marco wasn't careful, he could destroy Lucas's trust forever. And if Lucas found out too late, he could end up paying the price for a game he never agreed to play. Finally, Portia could feel the weight of her worries pressing down on her, an inescapable burden that only grew heavier with each passing day. The knowledge that Drew held something over her, something powerful enough to destroy the life she had built, left her feeling trapped, forced into a game she never wanted to play. She had spent years carefully constructing a stable, respectable life, ensuring that Trina had the future she deserved, but now all of it was at risk. Drew was not a man to be underestimated. He was calculating, ruthless when necessary, and above all, determined to get what he wanted. Portia feared that she had underestimated just how far he was willing to go, and now she was scrambling to stay one step ahead before it was too late. Despite her best efforts to keep her anxiety hidden, Portia couldn't help but replay worst-case scenarios in her mind. What if Drew went public with the information he had on her? What if she lost everything: her marriage, her career, her daughter's respect? She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let a man like Drew dictate the course of her life. But the reality was, she had no control over his actions, and the unknown was slowly eating away at her. Portia had always believed in fighting for what was right, but when faced with a man who had no qualms about using manipulation and power plays to his advantage, she wasn't sure what her next move should be. Meanwhile, Ava had been keeping a close watch on Drew, observing him with the calculating sharpness that had always served her well. She had been in Port Charles long enough to know that when someone started making moves like Drew was, they were bound to make enemies. And Drew had made plenty. Ava had her own suspicions, dangerous ones, and if they proved to be true, Drew wasn't just a threat to those around him, he was a man walking straight into his own destruction. She had a nagging feeling that one of Drew's past enemies was closing in, ready to make a decisive move against him. If she was right, then it was only a matter of time before he found himself at the center of something far more sinister than just blackmail and corporate scheming. The pieces were already falling into place, and Ava knew better than to ignore the signs. She had heard whispers, seen the way people looked at Drew when they thought no one was watching. Something was coming for him, and it wouldn't be subtle. Murder in Port Charles was rarely random, and when someone as connected as Drew found themselves entangled in a dangerous game, it was often a sign that a reckoning was near. The question wasn't if something was going to happen, it was when. Would Drew see the trap before it closed in on him? Or would he be too focused on his own power plays to realize that he had already lost control? As the week of March 24th to March 28th approached, Port Charles braced itself for the kind of shocking twists that could change everything. Unanswered questions loomed, secrets threatened to unravel, and at the center of it all was Drew, both a manipulator and a target. Portia remained on edge, her fear growing by the day, knowing that at any moment, her world could come crashing down. Ava, ever the strategist, weighed her options carefully, debating whether she should warn Drew or let him fall victim to the chaos he had helped create. But the true danger lay in the unknown. Someone out there wanted Drew to pay. Whether it was an old enemy, a wronged business rival, or someone with an even deeper vendetta remained unclear, but one thing was certain: Drew's next move would be crucial. If he wasn't careful, he might not just lose his reputation. He might lose everything. And as the days unfolded, the tension in Port Charles only continued to rise, leaving everyone wondering who would be left standing when the dust finally settled.